Under the scorching El Paso sun, Jack Dawson traced his weathered fingers along a freight car's hidden seams, uncovering a secret that would shatter his quiet life. A military-grade panel etched with a double-headed eagle, a symbol from a past he buried with his son's blood-stained bracelet. Was this the work of the Los Heros cartel? Or had an old ally turned traitor unleashed a nightmare on America's border? 10 years after his boy's screams faded into the desert night, Jack faced a chilling truth. The war he'd fled was clawing its way back, and this time, it wouldn't let him run. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 supporters. Join the fight to uncover what's next. Under the scorching El Paso sun, Jack Dawson traced his weathered fingers along a freight car's hidden seams, uncovering a secret that would shatter his quiet life. A military-grade panel etched with a double-headed eagle, a symbol from a past he buried with his son's blood-stained bracelet. Was this the work of the Los Heros cartel? Or had an old ally turned traitor unleashed a nightmare on America's border? 10 years after his boy's screams faded into the desert night, Jack faced a chilling truth. The war he'd fled was clawing its way back, and this time, it wouldn't let him run. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 supporters. Join the fight to uncover what's next. The freight yard stretched out like a graveyard of steel under the fading orange glow of dusk, dust devils swirling lazily across the cracked asphalt. Jack Dawson, clad in a faded denim jacket and work boots caked with grime, moved with the deliberate pace of a man who'd seen too much to rush. At 48, his broad shoulders still carried the strength of his Delta Force days, but his graying temples and the deep lines etched into his face told a different story. One of loss, of retreat, of a decade spent trying to outrun ghosts. He'd traded the chaos of war for the monotony of the El Paso Southern Railway, a supervisor's clipboard replacing the rifle he once gripped with deadly precision. 43 cars on the manifest for the 7:15, Henry Cole called out, wiping sweat from his brow as he consulted his tablet. The wiry conductor squinted against the glare, his voice tinged with the impatience of a man eager to clock out. "But we've got a last-minute addition from Ciudad." Jack's head snapped up, his hazel eyes narrowing. "Last-minute additions need my sign-off. Who cleared it?" "Customs pushed it through the new electronic system," Henry replied, scrolling through notifications. "All in order, Chief. No flags." "No flags doesn't mean no problems," Jack muttered, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. No approval request, no alert, nothing. His jaw tightened, a familiar itch crawling up his spine, the kind he hadn't felt since his last mission went to hell 10 years ago. "Hold that train. I want a physical check." Henry groaned, tossing his hands up. "We're already behind schedule, Jack. You want to explain this to the boss?" "Better late than dead," Jack shot back, his tone flat but unyielding. He didn't wait for a reply, striding toward car 37 with the focus of a hunter stalking prey. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the rusted steel. His radio crackled faintly, background noise he ignored as he ran his calloused hands over the coupling, then up the side of the car. The metal felt wrong, too smooth, too polished for a freight hauler battered by years of border runs. His fingers brushed a seam near the top, barely visible unless you knew where to look. He pulled a pocket knife from his belt, flicking it open with a practiced snap, and pried at the edge. The panel resisted, then gave way with a soft clank, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a tangle of wires and a sleek black device blinked faintly. A comms unit, military grade, the kind he'd seen in Kandahar, not Juarez. His breath caught as he traced the edge further, finding a faint etching, a double-headed eagle, its talons clutching a sword and a globe. Jack staggered back, the knife slipping from his hand and clattering to the ground. His chest tightened, memories flooding in. Ethan's laughter as he handed Jack the leather bracelet he'd made at summer camp, the boy's wide grin as he said, "Dad, my hero," Then the screams, the gunfire, the smoke choking the air as Jack's team pulled back under orders, leaving Ethan and the other hostages to die in a cartel ambush. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out that same bracelet, now stained with faded rust-brown streaks. Ethan's blood, a permanent mark of his failure. "Jack, you okay?" Henry's voice cut through the haze, laced with concern as he jogged over. "What the hell's in there?" Jack didn't answer, his gaze locked on the eagle. It wasn't just a cartel symbol. It was something he'd seen before, scrawled on classified briefs during his Delta days, linked to a shadow faction within the U.S. military. A traitor's mark. He shoved the bracelet back into his pocket, his voice low and rough. "Get me Sarah Rivera at the FBI field office. Tell her it's Los Herros, and it's bigger than we thought." Henry hesitated, then nodded, tapping his radio. "On it. But what's with the eagle? You've seen it before, haven't you?" Jack's silence was answer enough. He turned back to the car, his mind racing. The Los Herros cartel was ruthless, sure, but this was surgical, planned, precise. The kind of move that needed backing from someone with resources, someone inside. His phone buzzed. Emily, his wife, a former Army nurse who'd stood by him through the darkest years. Her text was short, urgent. "Hospitals prepping trauma bays. Something's coming, Jack. Stay safe." He stared at the screen, the words blurring as his pulse hammered. The hospital was 10 miles away, a world apart from the yard, yet the pieces were falling into place. A coordinated hit. A shadow creeping across the border. He grabbed his radio, barking to Henry, "Lock this yard down. No one in or out until we know what we're dealing with." As Henry scrambled to comply, Jack's eyes drifted to the horizon, where the last sliver of sunlight vanished, plunging the desert into darkness. The eagle stared back from the steel, a taunting ghost from a war he'd never truly left. Was this just cartel greed, or had someone he once trusted sold out everything he'd fought for? The answer was out there, waiting in the night, and it was coming for him whether he was ready or not. The desert night swallowed the last echoes of daylight as Jack Dawson stood frozen beside Car 37, the double-headed eagle glaring back from its steel hide like a predator sizing up its prey. His radio crackled, Henry Cole's voice cutting through the static. "Sarah Rivera's on her way, Jack. ETA, 15 minutes. What's the play?" Jack didn't answer right away, his mind a battlefield of instinct and dread. The Los Herros cartel wasn't just moving dope. This was an invasion, a calculated strike on America's border, and that eagle hinted at a ghost he couldn't shake. He clenched the blood-stained bracelet in his pocket, Ethan's voice whispering through the years. "Dad, my hero." He'd failed that boy once, he wouldn't fail again. "Lock it down tight," Jack finally growled into the radio, his voice like gravel scraped raw. "No train moves until we know what's inside every damn car." Henry muttered something about overtime but complied, his boots thudding away toward the control shack. Jack's eyes scanned the yard. 43 cars lined up like dominoes, silent under the moonless sky, their shadows stretching into the sand. The air hummed with tension, a stillness that felt like the inhale before a scream. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last, until headlights pierced the darkness, an unmarked SUV roaring into the yard, kicking up dust that shimmered in the beams. Sarah Rivera stepped out, her FBI windbreaker flapping in the dry wind, her dark eyes sharp and unyielding. At 35, she carried the weight of a decade chasing cartels, her petite frame belying a steel core Jack recognized instantly. "You sure about this, Dawson?" she asked, striding over with a flashlight already trained on the car. "Los Herros doesn't play with military toys like this." "Check it yourself," Jack said, stepping aside as she climbed up to inspect the panel. Her fingers traced the comms unit, then froze on the eagle etching. She swore under her breath, hopping down with a look that mirrored his own unease. "This isn't just cartel work," she said, her voice low. "That's encrypted hardware. Someone's feeding them tech and intel. You've seen this before?" Jack nodded, his throat tight. 10 years ago, shadow ops. Someone high up was running off-book missions, and that eagle was their signature. Thought it died with... He stopped, the memory of Ethan's final scream clawing at him. Sarah didn't press, but her gaze softened for a split second before snapping back to business. "We've tracked Los Eros pushing north hard lately," she said, pulling out her tablet. "But this is infrastructure. They're not smuggling. They're building something." Before Jack could respond, the yard erupted in chaos. A series of muffled thumps echoed from the southern line, followed by plumes of smoke curling into the sky, controlled detonations, precise and surgical, hitting the junction points. Jack's radio exploded with shouts. "Armed men at Delta and Echo checkpoints. They're taking the tracks." Sarah's tablet lit up with alerts, her fingers flying across the screen. "Sensors are going dark. Multiple breaches." "This isn't a raid, Jack, it's a takeover." He didn't hesitate. "Get to cover," he barked, shoving Sarah toward a stack of crates as he drew a concealed Glock from his holster, the only remnant of his old life he'd kept close. Muscle memory kicked in, his body low and fluid as he scanned the perimeter. Through the haze, black SUVs roared out of the desert, disgorging men in tactical gear, military precision, not cartel sloppiness. Their leaders stepped into the floodlights. Ricardo Morales, Los Heros' new kingpin, his scarred face twisted in a sneer, a custom AR-15 slung across his chest. "Morales," Sarah hissed, peering through the crates. "He's bold, but this isn't his style. Too clean." "Because he's not calling the shots," Jack muttered, his mind racing. Morales barked orders in Spanish, his men fanning out to secure the yard, but a faint crackle from his earpiece caught Jack's ear. A voice, clipped and American, issuing commands. Jack's blood ran cold. "That's not cartel chatter. Someone's pulling his strings." Sarah's eyes widened. "You think it's one of ours?" "I don't think..." "I know," Jack said, his grip tightening on the Glock. "We need Tom Bradley now." He reached into a hidden pocket of his jacket, pulling out a battered satellite phone he hadn't touched in years. Punching in a number from memory, he spoke fast. "Tom, it's Jack. Remember that contingency we swore we'd never need? It's here. Bring the team." The line crackled. Then Tom's gruff voice came through. "You sure, Dawson? You've been out a long time." "Dead sure," Jack replied, his eyes locked on Morales as more cartel vehicles rolled in. "And it's not just Los Heros, it's bigger." Tom didn't argue. 7 confirmed, 3 maybe. On our way. The call ended, leaving Jack and Sarah crouched in the shadows as explosions lit the night. Strategic blasts crippling the main line without destroying it. "They're not wrecking the railway," Jack said, piecing it together. "They're claiming it." Sarah's tablet buzzed again. Another alert, this one from Emily. "Hospitals on lockdown, armed men spotted nearby. Jack, what's happening?" Jack's stomach dropped, the words a punch to the gut. "They're hitting everywhere," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't a grab, it's a siege." Through the smoke, Morales raised a hand, signaling his men to halt. He tilted his head, listening to that unseen voice again, then grinned. A predator's smile that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. "They're expecting us to fight back," Sarah said, checking her own weapon. "What's the move?" Jack's mind churned. Ethan's death, the eagle, the American voice, Emily's plea. He holstered the Glock, his decision made. "We don't fight yet, we watch. Figure out who's really behind this." He pointed to a rusted maintenance shed 50 yards off. "There. We regroup, wait for Tom, then we hit them where it hurts." As they slipped through the chaos, a final explosion rocked the yard, illuminating Morales' silhouette against the flames. Jack caught a glimpse of something in the man's hand, a tablet, its screen flashing with coordinates. Was this just a cartel play, or had America's own betrayed it? The answer was coming, and it carried the weight of a war Jack thought he'd buried forever. The maintenance shed smelled of rust and stale oil, its walls trembling as another explosion rattled the El Paso rail yard. Jack Dawson crouched behind a stack of moldering crates, his Glock steady in his hands, the weight of it a cold comfort against the chaos outside. Sarah Rivera knelt beside him, her FBI windbreaker smeared with dust, her tablet casting a faint blue glow as she tapped furiously at the screen. Through the shed's cracked window, they watched Ricardo Morales' men swarm the tracks like ants claiming a carcass, their movements too precise, too disciplined for a cartel crew. Jack's gut churned. This wasn't just Los Herros' game. That American voice on Morales' radio lingered in his mind, a phantom he couldn't place but knew too well. "Tom's team is 20 minutes out," Sarah whispered, her voice tight. "Border Patrol's scrambling, but they're stretched thin. Someone's jamming their comms." She glanced at Jack, her dark eyes searching his face. "You really think this is bigger than the cartel?" Jack didn't answer right away, his fingers brushing the leather bracelet in his pocket. Ethan's blood-stained gift, a tether to the boy he'd lost. 10 years ago, he'd heard a voice like that on a mission gone wrong, barking orders over a secure line as his team pulled back, leaving Ethan and a dozen civilians to die in a cartel slaughterhouse. The memory hit like a fist. Ethan's screams, the smoke, the guilt that had driven Jack from Delta Force into this quiet exile. "It's not a think," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "It's a no, that eagle on the car. It's a shadow op, Mark. Someone's playing both sides." Sarah's jaw tightened, but before she could reply, the shed's radio sparked to life, Henry Cole's panicked voice cutting through. "Jack, they're locking down the south line, armed to the teeth, tactical gear, the works. What the hell's going on?" "Stay low, Henry," Jack snapped back. "Don't engage, we're handling it." He killed the transmission, his mind racing. The cartel wasn't just taking the railway, they were fortifying it, turning it into a chokehold on the border. But why? His phone buzzed. Emily again, hospitals locked tight, armed men circling the perimeter. "Jack, I'm scared." His heart skipped, the words slicing deeper than any bullet. He typed a quick reply. "Hold on, I'm coming," but the signal dropped, leaving him staring at a dead screen. "We've got bigger problems," Sarah said, shoving her tablet under his nose. Thermal imaging flickered across the display, 20-plus heat signatures near the main track, unloading crates from an unmarked truck. She zoomed in, and Jack's breath caught. Anti-aircraft weapons. Russian-made, their sleek barrels glinting under the floodlights. "Not smuggling," Sarah said, her voice rising. "They're setting up a no-fly zone. This is military-grade escalation." Jack's eyes narrowed, the pieces snapping into place. They control the rails, they control supply lines, add air defense, and they own the border. He stood peering through the window as Morales' men assembled the weapons with chilling efficiency. But they don't have the brains for this alone. Someone's training them. The shed door creaked open and Jack spun, Glock raised, only to lower it as Tom Bradley stepped inside, his grizzled face shadowed under a worn ball cap. At 55, Tom carried the scars of a lifetime in Delta. Silver hair, a limp from shrapnel, and eyes that had seen too much death. Behind him, two figures slipped in, ex-Delta operators, lean and silent, their gear patched but deadly. "Took you long enough," Jack said, a faint edge to his tone. "You called, I came," Tom replied, his voice gruff but steady. 7 of us total. Rest are en route. What's the sitrep?" Jack gestured to the window. "Los Herros is locking down the yard with anti-aircraft tech. Morales is running point, but he's got an American handler on comms, and that eagle," he pointed to the car outside. "It's our past, Tom. Someone we knew." Tom's face darkened, his hand tightening on the rifle slung across his chest. "You're talking about the Juarez op, aren't you? The one where—" He stopped, glancing at Jack's pocket, where the bracelet bulged faintly. "Ethan." "Don't," Jack cut in, his voice a low growl. "Just tell me you didn't know about this." The air thickened with unspoken history. Tom had been the one to order the retreat that day, leaving Ethan to die. Jack had never forgiven him, and the tension between them crackled like a live wire. "I didn't," Tom said, meeting his gaze. But if it's shadow ops, we're in deep. We need to move." Before Jack could reply, a burst of gunfire shredded the night, bullets punching through the shed's thin walls. "Down!" Sarah yelled, diving behind the crates as Jack and Tom hit the floor. Through the chaos, Jack glimpsed Morales' men closing in. Then a figure in black tactical gear, moving with Delta precision, broke from the pack. A stray round caught him, and as he fell, his sleeve rode up, revealing a tattoo. Delta 9. Jack froze, his blood turning to ice. "That's one of ours," he whispered, crawling to the window. The man's lifeless eyes stared back, a ghost from a unit Jack had once called family. "They've turned our own against us." Sarah grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "Jack, we can't stay here. They'll pin us down." "She's right," Tom said, already signaling his men. "We fall back, regroup at the warehouse on the edge of town. I've got gear there, enough to hit back." Jack hesitated, the tattoo burning into his mind. Was Tom still the man he'd trusted, or had the years twisted him too? His phone buzzed again. No signal, no word from Emily. The hospital was a ticking clock, and every second dragged him closer to losing her like he'd lost Ethan. "Fine," he said at last, his voice steel. "But we're not running forever. We find out who's behind this, and we end it." As they slipped into the night, dodging gunfire and shadows, the yard glowed with the eerie light of cartel flares. Jack caught one last glimpse of the fallen Delta man, his brother in arms, now a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Who had turned him? Was Tom hiding something? Or was the past just a cruel mirror? The answers were out there, buried in the smoke, and Jack would dig them up, even if it cost him everything. The warehouse on the edge of El Paso loomed like a skeleton against the night sky, its rusted beams groaning under the weight of years. Jack Dawson slipped inside, his Glock still warm from the firefight at the rail yard, his breath ragged as he followed Tom Bradley and Sarah Rivera through the shadows. The air reeked of diesel and decay, but it was sanctuary. For now. Tom's 2 Delta men fanned out, securing the perimeter, their silenced rifles glinting faintly in the dim light filtering through broken windows. Jack's mind churned. The image of that Delta 9 tattoo seared into his skull. Proof that the enemy wasn't just Los Heros, but something darker, something from within. "We've got gear here," Tom said, kicking open a metal crate to reveal an arsenal. Rifles, grenades, night vision goggles, patched together from their old lives. Enough to hit back. "But we need a plan, Jack." Sarah's tablet buzzed, cutting through the tension. She swiped at the screen, her face paling as she read the incoming alert. "Jack, it's the hospital. Armed men breached the perimeter 10 minutes ago. Full lockdown now. They've got hostages." Her voice cracked, and she shoved the tablet at him. Thermal scans glowed on the display, dozens of heat signatures clustered in the trauma wing, with a smaller group moving systematically floor by floor. "My daughter's in there. Lily, she's 12, recovering from a car wreck. I can't..." Jack's chest tightened, his fingers brushing the leather bracelet in his pocket. Ethan's blood-stained relic. He saw the same terror in Sarah's eyes that he'd felt 10 years ago, the helpless ache of a parent facing loss. "We'll get her out," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Emily's there too. She texted me before the signal cut. They're not taking anyone else from us." Tom's jaw clenched, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. Guilt, maybe, from the Juarez op that still haunted them both. "If they've hit the hospital simultaneous with the yard, this isn't random," he said. "It's a trap, Jack. Split us up, force our hand." Before Jack could respond, the warehouse radio crackled. Emily's voice, faint and trembling. "Jack, they've rigged something in the vents. Chemicals, I think. They're demanding you surrender in 1 hour or they blow it. I'll protect who I can, but..." The line went dead, static swallowing her words. Jack's knees buckled, the memory of Ethan's screams merging with Emily's plea. He gripped the table, knuckles white, his decision tearing him apart. "They've got bombs?" Sarah's voice rose, panic bleeding through her calm. "Lily's in there, Jack. She's on oxygen after the crash. She won't survive gas. We have to go now." Jack stared at the tablet, then at the rail yard glowing faintly in the distance. Morales' men were still fortifying the tracks, anti-aircraft barrels rising like sentinels against the stars. The hospital was 10 miles away, a world apart, yet tied to the same nightmare. "If I surrender, they win the border," he said, his voice low. "If I don't, we lose the hospital. They're betting I'll crack." Tom stepped forward, his limp more pronounced under the strain. "We split the team. I'll take these two to the hospital. Quiet entry, neutralize the bombs. You and Sarah hold the yard, keep Morales pinned. We can't let them control both." Sarah grabbed Jack's arm, her nails digging in. "My daughter's life isn't a bargaining chip, Dawson. You'd leave Emily too, after Ethan?" Her words stung, a mirror to his own guilt, but Jack pulled free, his eyes hard. "I'm not abandoning anyone," he snapped, "but if we lose the yard, they choke the border. Millions pay the price." "Tom's right, we split. We fight on two fronts." He turned to Tom, the old wound between them flaring. "You get them out, Bradley. No retreat this time. Swear it." Tom met his gaze, unflinching. "I swear." The promise hung heavy, a fragile bridge over a decade of mistrust. He nodded to his men, already moving, ghosts in the dark, heading for a borrowed truck outside. Sarah's hand shook as she holstered her weapon, tears brimming but unshed. "If Lily dies, Jack, I'll never forgive you." She stormed to the crate, grabbing a rifle, her resolve hardening. Jack watched her, the weight of her words crushing him. He'd chosen the mission over Ethan once. Could he live with that choice again? The warehouse doors slammed shut behind Tom's team, leaving Jack and Sarah in a silence broken only by the distant rumble of cartel vehicles. He pulled out the satellite phone, its screen flickering as he typed a message to Emily. "Hold on, we're coming." No signal, no way to know if it reached her. His fingers lingered on the bracelet. Ethan's voice echoing, "Dad, my hero." Was he still that man or just a fool chasing redemption through blood? "Jack, look at this," Sarah called, her voice sharp as she zoomed in on the tablet's thermal feed. A new signature appeared near the hospital, a single figure, stationary, watching from a rooftop. "Sniper?" she asked. "No," Jack said, squinting at the screen. "Observer. Someone's orchestrating this." He replayed Morales' earpiece crackle in his mind. That American voice, clipped and cold. The hospital wasn't just a trap, it was a test, and they were pawns in a game he didn't yet understand. "We've got 50 minutes, Sarah said, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. "What's the move?" Jack holstered his Glock, his decision a knife in his gut. "We hit the yard hard, draw their focus, give Tom a window at the hospital, but we watch that observer. Whoever they are, they're the key." He stepped toward the door, the night swallowing him whole. "Let's move." As they slipped into the desert, the rail yard burned like a beacon ahead, while the hospital loomed in his mind, a ticking clock counting down to salvation or slaughter. Could he trust Tom to keep his word, or was history doomed to repeat? And that rooftop shadow, was it friend turned foe, or a new player in this war? The answers waited, shrouded in smoke and steel, and Jack would find them, even if it meant tearing open every scar he'd tried to bury. The desert wind howled through the night as Jack Dawson and Sarah Rivera crept toward the rail yard, the distant glow of cartel flares painting the horizon in shades of blood and fire. Jack's Glock felt heavier with every step, the weight of his choice, to fight at the yard while Emily and Lily faced death at the hospital, crushing him like a vice. Sarah moved beside him, her rifle slung tight, her silence a storm of unspoken fury. 45 minutes remained until the chemical bombs in the hospital vents went live, and every second ticked louder in Jack's skull. He gripped Ethan's bracelet in his pocket, its leather worn smooth by years of guilt, and prayed Tom Bradley could keep his promise this time. They reached the yard's edge, ducking behind a rusted fuel tank as Morales' men patrolled the tracks, their anti-aircraft weapons now half-assembled under floodlights. Jack's satellite phone buzzed faintly. A weak signal, a voice breaking through. "Jack, it's David Lopez. I'm at the south maintenance hatch. Tunnel's clear. Meet me there." David, the DEA undercover agent Jack had pulled into this mess, had been feeding intel on Los Herros for months. His voice carried a strain Jack didn't like, but there was no time to question it. "South hatch," Jack muttered to Sarah, pointing across the yard. "We go underground, hit them from below." Sarah nodded, her eyes still burning with the hospital's shadow. "If this goes wrong, Jack, it's on you." Her words cut deep, but he swallowed the retort, leading her through a maze of shadows and steel. The hatch loomed ahead, a dented grate half buried in sand, its hinges groaning as Jack pried it open. David waited below, his lean frame hunched in the dim tunnel light, his DEA jacket patched with dirt. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his dark eyes darting nervously as he waved them down. "Took you long enough," David said, his voice low but shaky. "Tunnel runs under the main platform, exits near their comms hub. We can disrupt them from there." Jack dropped into the tunnel, the air cool and damp against his skin, the walls narrowing around them like a coffin. Sarah followed, her rifle scraping the concrete as David led the way, his flashlight flickering over ancient timber beams. "How'd you get this far in?" Jack asked, his instincts prickling. David had always been solid. Too solid, maybe, for a man buried deep in cartel filth. "Luck," David replied, too quick. "Morales' men don't know these tunnels, I do." They moved in silence, boots splashing through shallow puddles, the distant rumble of the yard vibrating overhead. Jack's mind raced. Emily's last message. Tom's team at the hospital, that rooftop observer Sarah had spotted. The pieces didn't fit. Not yet, but the double-headed eagle haunted him, a ghost from a past he couldn't outrun. Then it happened. Too fast, too quiet. A muffled crack echoed behind them and Sarah grunted, spinning as a dart struck her shoulder. She collapsed, her rifle clattering, tranquilizers spreading fast. Jack whirled, Glock raised, but David was already on him, a stun baton crackling in his hand. Jack dodged, the shock grazing his arm, numbing it as he stumbled back. "David, what the hell?" "I'm sorry, Jack," David rasped, his face twisting with shame. "They've got my sister, my niece. I had no choice." He lunged again, but Jack sidestepped, slamming David against the wall, the baton skittering away. Before he could press, shouts erupted ahead, Morales' men pouring into the tunnel, weapons hot. "Ambush!" Jack roared, dragging Sarah's limp form behind a beam as bullets chewed the concrete. Two figures emerged from the dark, Mike Evans and another Delta operator, Tom's men sent to reinforce. "Jack, we've got—" Mike's words cut off as a round punched through his chest, blood spraying as he fell. The second man went down a heartbeat later, a headshot dropping him like a stone. Jack fired back, his Glock spitting lead, but the tunnel was a kill zone. David had sold them out. "You bastard," Jack snarled, pinning David's throat against the wall. How long have you been theirs?" "Months," David choked, tears streaking his face. "Hayes, General Hayes, he runs it all. Threatened my family. I fed him your moves, Jack. The yard, the tunnels, everything." Jack's blood froze. Hayes, Victor Hayes, his old Delta commander, the man who'd ordered the retreat that killed Ethan. The Eagle, the American voice. It was him. "Hayes," Jack whispered, the name a blade in his gut, but there was no time. Cartel boots pounded closer, their shouts echoing. David shoved a small device into Jack's hand, a detonator wired to an EMP charge. "Take it," he gasped. "I rigged it. Knock out their comms." "Redemption's all I've got left." Before Jack could react, David broke free, sprinting toward the enemy, screaming, "Go!" He hit the trigger in his own hand and a blinding pulse erupted, frying lights and radios as cartel gunfire cut him down in a hail of red. Jack shielded Sarah, the EMP's hum fading as darkness swallowed the tunnel. Morales' men faltered, their tech dead, giving Jack a window. He hoisted Sarah over his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady, and stumbled toward the exit. David's last words ringing, "I can't save them, but I can save you." Redemption or damnation, Jack didn't know. Only that two good men were dead because of it, and Hayes' shadow loomed larger than ever. He emerged beneath the platform, Cartel chaos above him, Sarah stirring faintly. The hospital clock ticked, 30 minutes left. Tom's team was out there, fighting their own war, but Jack was blind now, half his crew gone, betrayed by a friend. Was David's sacrifice worth it, or had he just damned them all? And Hayes. How deep did his treachery run? The answers waited in the smoke-filled yard, and Jack would claw through hell to find them, even if it meant facing the man who'd already taken everything from him. The tunnel's silence was a grave, broken only by the faint drip of water and Sarah Rivere's shallow breaths as Jack Dawson carried her limp form toward the rail yard's underbelly. The EMP pulse from David Lopez's sacrifice still hummed in Jack's ears. A bitter gift that had crippled the cartel's comms but cost him two Delta brothers, Mike Evans and another whose name he'd barely learned. Blood stained his hands, David's last words echoing like a curse. "I can't save them, but I can save you." Jack's Glock hung heavy at his side, his arm numb from the stun baton's graze, but it was the name David had choked out, General Victor Hayes, that burned hottest. A wound ripped open after 10 years of scar tissue. He emerged beneath the main platform, the air thick with diesel fumes and the acrid tang of gunpowder. Above, Morales' men scrambled in disarray, their radios dead, their anti-aircraft setups half-finished under flickering floodlights. Jack eased Sarah against a concrete pillar, her eyes fluttering open as the tranquilizer wore off. "Jack," she rasped, her voice weak. "What happened?" "David sold us out," he said, his tone flat, hiding the storm inside. "Hayes got to him, threatened his family. He took it back with an EMP. But Mike's gone. So's the other guy." Sarah's face twisted, grief and rage warring as she gripped her rifle. "Lily, my girl, did he sell her out too?" Jack shook his head, checking his watch. 25 minutes until the hospital bombs blew. "He didn't know about that. Hayes is playing us all." He pulled Ethan's bracelet from his pocket, running his thumb over the faded "Dad, My Hero" engraving. Hayes, his old commander, the man who'd ordered the retreat that left Ethan to die, had been the shadow all along. The American voice pulling Morales' strings. "We need to move," he said, shoving the bracelet back. "Comms hub's 50 yards. Knock out their backup systems, buy Tom time." Sarah staggered to her feet, leaning on him, her resolve hardening. "Then let's end this." They slipped through the yard's understructure, shadows among shadows, the chaos above masking their steps. Jack's mind churned. Hayes, the double-headed eagle, the Delta traitor. How deep did this go? Had Hayes turned after Juarez, or had he always been rotten? They reached the comms hub, a makeshift bunker beneath the platform, its steel door ajar. Jack kicked it open, Glock raised, and froze. Inside, a bank of monitors flickered, thermal feeds showing the hospital siege, Emily dashing between gurneys, shielding patients as armed men loomed. Another screen tracked the yard, red dots marking Morales' positions, and on a table, files stamped with that damned eagle, detailing shipments. Chemical weapons not just for El Paso, but headed for U.S. cities, signed off by shell companies linked to Hayes. "Jack, look," Sarah whispered, pointing to a monitor flashing coordinates. "Chicago, Houston, D.C. He's not just taking the border, he's selling this stuff. Terrorism, not cartel business." Before Jack could process it, a speaker crackled overhead, and a voice, smooth, cold, familiar, filled the room. "Still good at sneaking around, Dawson," Victor Hayes said, his tone dripping with mockery. "But you're late to the party." Jack spun, searching for the source, but the voice was everywhere. "You thought this was Morales' show? He's a tool, sharp but disposable. The border's just step one." Jack's blood ran cold, his grip tightening on the Glock. "Hayes," he snarled, "you bastard! What's this about? Order, Hayes replied, calm as death. The government failed us. Failed Ethan, failed you. I let him die to teach you sacrifice, Jack. Bureaucrats can't secure this country. Private power can. These weapons? A demonstration. Chaos breeds demand, and I supply the solution. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Ethan screams, roaring back. Jack smashed the speaker with his fist, sparks flying, but Hayes's laugh lingered. You killed my son to prove a point? He roared, his voice breaking. You're no soldier. You're a monster. Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Jack, he's baiting you. We've got the files, proof we can stop him. Jack nodded, shoving the documents into his pack, but his hands shook with rage. He trashed the hub-ripping wires, smashing drives, each blow a scream for Ethan. Sarah covered the door, her rifle steady despite her fading strength. 20 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. Tom better be moving fast. The radio crackled. Tom's voice strained and urgent. Jack, we're in the hospital. Bombs are real. Chemical agents, military grade. We've got one disarmed, but there's two more, and I'm hit. Holding the line. Where are you? Jack's heart sank. Yard's comms are down, he replied. Hayes is behind it all. Chemical weapons for sale, not just here. We've got evidence. Hang on, Tom. Hayes, Tom's voice cracked. That son of a... All right, we'll manage. Get Morales, cut the head off this snake. Static swallowed the rest, leaving Jack staring at the dead radio. Tom was bleeding out there, keeping his word, but the clock was merciless. Sarah's tablet pinged, an update from the hospital feed. The rooftop observer shifted, a scoped rifle now visible in their hands. He's watching everything, she said, her voice tight. Hayes isn't just on comms, he's here. Jack's eyes narrowed, the pieces locking in. He's playing God, testing us, watching us break. He grabbed a grenade from the crate they'd brought, his plan forming. We draw Morales out, force Hayes to show his hand. Hit the platform, make noise. Sarah nodded, but her gaze lingered on the hospital feed, Emily's figure flickering, Lily nowhere in sight. If we fail, Jack. We won't, he said, but the lie tasted bitter. He pulled the bracelet out, kissing it once. A silent vow, to Ethan, to Emily, to Lily. Hayes had taken his past. He wouldn't take his future. They slipped back into the yard, the night alive with shouts and gunfire. Morales stood atop the platform, barking orders, oblivious to the storm brewing below. Jack primed the grenade, his heart pounding. Was Hayes really here, or just a voice in the dark? Could Tom hold the hospital, or was history repeating? And those weapons, were they already gone, seeding chaos beyond El Paso? The answers waited above, in the fire and steel, and Jack would drag them out, even if it meant facing the devil who'd haunted him for a decade. The rail yard blazed under a sky torn by smoke and stars as Jack Dawson hurled the grenade, its arc a fleeting spark against the chaos. The explosion rocked the platform, shredding a cartel ammo crate and sending Morales' men scattering like roaches in the light. Jack charged through the haze, Sarah Rivera at his side, her rifle spitting fire as they carved a path toward the heart of the Los Cerros stronghold. 15 minutes remained on the hospital clock. 15 minutes until chemical death claimed Emily, Lily, and hundreds more. Jack's lungs burned, his arms still numb from David's betrayal. But Hayes's voice echoed in his skull. I let him die to teach you sacrifice. Ethan's ghost drove him forward, a fury he couldn't bury. Morales, Jack roared, spotting the cartel kingpin atop the platform, his scarred face twisting as he rallied his men. Jack fired, the Glock's recoil a steady pulse, but Morales ducked behind a steel girder, barking orders into a backup radio. Hayes's leash still tight. Sarah flanked left, her shots precise, despite the tranquilizers lingering haze, dropping 2 cartel soldiers in a spray of red. He's pinned, she shouted, her voice raw. Take him! Jack vaulted onto the platform, bullets whining past as he closed the gap. Morales swung his AR-15, a wild burst forcing Jack to dive behind a crate, splinters biting his skin. "You're dead, gringo," Morales snarled, his grin feral. "This is my border now." "Not yours," Jack growled, rolling out and firing. A round grazed Morales' shoulder, staggering him. Jack lunged, slamming the Glock's butt into Morales' jaw, sending him sprawling. The Kingpin's weapon clattered away and Jack pinned him, knee on chest, barrel to throat. "Who's pulling your strings?" "Hayes." "Where is he?" Morales laughed, blood flecking his lips. "Too late, hero. He's already won." Before Jack could press, a shadow loomed. A Cartel enforcer, blade flashing. Sarah's rifle barked and the man dropped, but the distraction was enough. Morales kicked free, scrambling for a stairwell leading up. Jack pursued, adrenaline drowning the pain, Sarah covering his back as they climbed. The stairs spat them onto the rooftop, a wind-swept expanse of steel and gravel overlooking the burning yard. A Black Hawk helicopter hovered at the edge, its rotor wash whipping dust into a storm, its side emblazoned with that double-headed eagle. And there, stepping from the shadows, was General Victor Hayes. Tall, silver-haired, his Delta fatigues traded for a sleek black suit, a Beretta in his hand, his cold blue eyes locked on Jack, a predator's calm masking the monster within. "Jack," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the roar. "You're predictable, always rushing in to save the day, just like Juarez." Jack froze, his Glock trained on Hayes, Ethan's bracelet a weight in his pocket. "You killed my son," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You ordered us out, left him to die. For this profit?" Hayes smirked, holstering his Beretta with deliberate ease. "I taught you reality, Dawson. The world's not saved by heroes, it's ruled by power. Ethan was collateral, a lesson you never learned." He gestured to the chopper. "This is order, private strength, no bureaucracy. Join me, or die, like him." Sarah edged closer, her rifle aimed, but Jack waved her back, his vision tunneling on Hayes. "You're no soldier," he said, stepping forward. "You're a traitor." He fired, but Hayes ducked, the shot sparking off steel, and the general drew fast, a round slamming into Jack's shoulder. Pain seared through him, his Glock slipping as he staggered. Hayes advanced, kicking the weapon away, his boot pinning Jack's chest. "You're weak," he sneered, aiming at Jack's head. "Always were." The chopper dipped lower, its door open, ready for escape. Sarah fired, forcing Hayes to dodge, but his men, ex-Delta-turned mercenaries, poured from the stairwell, pinning her behind a vent. Jack's hand fumbled to his jacket, finding Emily's letter, the one she'd begged him not to open unless he was done. Blood soaked his shirt, his breath ragged, but he tore it free, Hayes' gun looming. The words blurred through tears. "Jack, Ethan and I are proud of you. Don't give up. Your hope for those who can't fight." A sob broke from him, Ethan's voice rising. "Dad, my hero." With a roar, Jack surged, pain forgotten, tackling Hayes as the general fired. A miss, the bullet gouging gravel. They grappled, fists in fury, Jack's strength fading but unyielding. He drove Hayes back, slamming him against the chopper's skids, the bird lurching as its pilot fought the controls. "For Ethan!" Jack yelled, wrenching Hayes' arm and firing the Beretta into the engine, a deafening crack as flames erupted, the chopper spinning wild. Hayes broke free, lunging for the edge, but Jack grabbed him, hurling him down. The general's scream cut short as Jack's knife, Ethan's old camp blade, sank into his chest, a final guttural cry swallowed by the wind. The chopper crashed into the desert below, a fireball lighting the night, and Jack collapsed, blood pooling, Hayes' lifeless eyes staring up at nothing. Sarah fought through, dropping the last mercenary, rushing to Jack's side. "You're hit! Stay with me," she cried, pressing his wound. Jack clutched the letter, tears streaming, whispering, "Ethan, I did it." The yard fell silent, Morales' men fleeing the inferno. The battle won. But at what cost? The radio crackled, Tom's voice faint. "Jack, bombs disarmed, hospital safe, Lily's okay, I'm holding on." Relief flooded Jack, a fragile hope amid the wreckage. Sarah sobbed, clutching him, and as dawn broke, painting the sky gold, Jack saw Ethan's face in the light. A hero's promise kept. But Hayes' last words lingered. "You can't stop the future." Had Jack ended it or just delayed it? Was justice served in blood or lost in vengeance? The answers hung unanswered, a challenge for those watching, a spark to ignite debate as the sun rose over a battered El Paso. Dawn broke over El Paso like a fragile promise, its golden light spilling across the rail yard's smoldering ruins. Jack Dawson slumped against the rooftop's edge, blood seeping from his shoulder, Emily's crumpled letter clutched in his trembling hand. The words, "Ethan and I are proud of you," blurred through tears as he stared at the wreckage below, where Victor Hayes' twisted body lay amid the helicopter's charred remains. The air was thick with ash and silence. The Los Herros cartel's grip shattered, their anti-aircraft guns silent sentinels in a battle lost. Yet Jack's victory felt hollow, shadowed by the cost. David's betrayal, Mike's death, and the ghosts that refused to rest. Sarah Rivera knelt beside him, her rifle discarded, her hands pressing a torn sleeve against his wound. "You're a mess, Dawson," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. "But you did it! Lily's safe. Emily, too." She tapped her radio, Tom Bradley's faint reply crackling through. "Hospital's clear. Bombs out. I'm stable, barely. You owe me a beer, Jack." Jack exhaled, a shudder of relief shaking him. He pictured Emily's face, her quiet strength, the way she'd held him after Ethan's death, and Lily, a girl he'd never met but fought for like his own. "They're alive," he whispered, kissing Ethan's bracelet. Its leather stained with both their blood now. "I kept them safe, kid." The wind carried his words away, a prayer to a son who'd never hear it, but the weight in his chest lightened, just enough to breathe. Sarah helped him stand, her arm under his, and they limped to the stairwell, the yard sprawling beneath them, a battlefield reclaimed. Morales' men had fled, their kingpin broken, their plans in ashes. Sirens wailed in the distance, Border Patrol, FBI, local PD rushing to secure what was left. Jack paused, his gaze catching on Hayes' body, the double-headed eagle on the chopper's wreckage glinting like a taunt. "He said I couldn't stop the future," Jack muttered. "What did he mean?" Sarah frowned, her tablet buzzing with updates. "Those files we grabbed, they're not just about El Paso. Chemical weapons, private armies, deals with terrorists. He was building something global. We stopped him here, but..." She trailed off, her eyes dark with the unspoken. They descended, each step a jolt of pain, and reached the yard as an FBI van screeched in. Agents swarmed, barking orders, but Jack waved them off, leaning against a crate. "I'm done fighting," he told Sarah, his voice raw. 10 years running from Juarez and it found me anyway. No more." She nodded, understanding flickering in her gaze. "You don't have to. We've got Hayes' evidence, enough to burn his network down, but you're not out yet, Jack. They'll need you to testify." He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not this time. I'm staying here, building something better." He glanced at the horizon where El Paso's skyline rose against the dawn. A city battered but unbroken. Kids like Ethan, like Lily, they need a chance, not cartels or traitors. "I'll start there." Sarah squeezed his good shoulder, her smile widening. "A training center? You're crazy, Dawson, but it's a good crazy." She turned to coordinate with the agents, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. He pulled the bracelet out, tracing "Dad, my hero" with a bloodied finger, and made a silent vow. To turn this hell into hope. To give the next generation what he couldn't give Ethan. Hours later at the hospital, Jack sat by Tom's bedside, the old soldier bandaged but alive, a grin cracking his grizzled face. "Told you I'd keep my word," Tom said, his voice weak. "No retreat this time." Jack clasped his hand, the rift between them mending in the quiet, forgiveness not spoken, but felt. Emily rushed in, her nurse's scrub stained, throwing her arms around Jack despite his protests. "You idiot," she whispered, tears soaking his shirt. "You came back to me." Across the hall, Sarah cradled Lily, the girl's small frame dwarfed by an oxygen mask, her eyes bright with life. Jack watched them, a lump rising in his throat. A future saved, a past redeemed. Days later, he stood in the yard again, blueprints in hand for a youth center, rifle ranges, classrooms, a place to teach resilience over ruin. Teens gathered, locals drawn by whispers of the man who'd faced down a cartel, their laughter a fragile melody over the scars. "We'll be strong like you, Mr. Jack," one called, and he smiled, seeing Ethan in their faces. But as dusk fell, a shadow crept in. An unmarked envelope arrived at the FBI field office, slipped under Sarah's door. No sender, no trace. Inside, a single page from Hayes' files. Coordinates across Europe, Asia, South America, stamped with that eagle and a scrawled note. "This is only the beginning." Sarah stared at it, then called Jack, her voice tight. "He wasn't alone, Jack. Someone's picking up where he left off." Jack hung up, stepping onto the yard's edge, the sun sinking red over the desert. He'd stopped Hayes, saved El Paso, but the war wasn't over. Not for the world. Maybe not for him. He clutched Ethan's bracelet, the promise of his center a flickering light against the dark. Had he won, or just bought time? Was his fight local, or should he chase this new shadow? The teens' voices rose behind him, a chorus of hope. "We'll make you proud!" And Jack turned back, choosing them for now. But that envelope lingered, a question mark in the dust. Was justice a rooftop kill, or a system unbroken? Could one man stop a future Hayes foresaw, or was it inevitable? The dawn held hope, but the night whispered doubt, and the debate burned on, waiting for voices to rise in the comments below.